Hello and welcome to the Supernatural Track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z. Martin, and tonight we are talking about wearing other skins, all the times that Sam and Dean weren't who they seemed to be, and how that affects a person. But before we dive into that, let's let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Susan.
Gail, it's always so fun to be here. Thank you. I'm Susan Nylander. I teach English at Barstow College, the little oasis out in the desert off Highway Route 66. And Mandy, my writing partner there, we wrote Death and Supernatural, edited that collection. We're currently working on Women in Supernatural, an essay collection that we hope will be out soon-ish, next year maybe.
Awesome. Kaela?
Thanks for having me. I'm Kaela. I use they and she pronouns, and I am a licensed clinical psychologist out of the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm the co-author of Fandom Acts of Kindness, a guide to activism, advocacy, and doing chaotic good, and also have a chapter in Soups Ain't Always Heroes, and There'll Be Peace When You Are Done.
Cool. Mandy?
Hi, good to be with you today. Thanks for having me. I'm Mandy Taylor. I am currently an instructional designer at California State University, San Bernardino, and a doctoral student at Boise State. I am oftentimes collaborator with Susan Nylander. We went to grad school together, and she got me into Supernatural. So all the things I know about Supernatural are her fault or her credit, however you want to look at it. So happy to be here, happy to talk all things Supernatural.
Well, and thrilled to have you here. I'm Gail Z. Martin, and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write epic and urban fantasy. As Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance, but all my modern worlds are ones Sam and Dean could walk into and feel right at home. And my only real qualification is being an obsessed fan. So let's get to the good stuff. So many times in Supernatural, we saw shapeshifters and monsters that could look like someone else, take on another appearance, or we saw the boys pretending to be something they weren't or getting taken over. As we've often said, Sam got repossessed more than an old Ford. This was an ongoing thing. So let's talk a little bit about what happens when you're wearing other skins, other personalities, when you're not who you are supposed to be. And maybe the easiest way to slide into that, is with shapeshifters. We had some great episodes on that. Susan, what comes to mind?
Well, I think about, in Skin, that's one of the first times we saw a shifter and takes over Dean's, physical form. And, that was, I think of that poor man whose wife, blames him. He gets blamed for her torture and murder. And, having to say, no, that wasn't me. It may look like me, but it wasn't me. And what an awful thing for him. But then when Dean ends up, his physical form is taken over by the shifter, Sam is really at a loss. He's sort of he doesn't quite buy that this is Dean, and yet he's looking right at him. So I think too, on the other side of that is, how do you trust, how do you trust whether that's that person that you are looking at, if that's the real person? So, your eyes can deceive you, to quote Yoda. So I think that how we present to the world is often how the world treats us. So if he's wearing Dean, he expects Sam to treat him like Dean, or believe him, or buy into the fact that he's supposed to be Dean. So it's kind of interesting. That was and especially that particular episode when Dean actually is facing himself, and shoots himself. at the end of that. So it's an old trope, but I think they put a new spin on that in that one, in particular. So that's the scene that I can still never watch, where he starts pulling the skin off of him. That's one of those scenes that it's like, nope, can't watch it. Nope, seen it once, can't watch it again. So I think
And
we
they
all
did
have that
practical effects in that first season. It wasn't CGI. So that's really him stripping the goop off. That,
Right.
yeah, I'm sure they didn't sign up to do that more than once if they could help it. Kaela?
That image is so like seared into my brain. I can see it without even having watched the episode recently. I think one of the things that thinking about shapeshifters brings up for me is this idea of the uncanny valley and why we are afraid of humanoid things, that somewhere in our evolution we have learned to fear something that looks human but is not. And I think that one of the things that's really cool about Supernatural is that whether we're talking about shapeshifters, that is a hard word to say over and over again. Whether we're talking about shapeshifters or we're talking about other types of monsters or demons or possession, there is that sort of primal fear. And, you were speaking to that a little bit, Susan, about not being able to trust what you see in front of you, not being able to trust who this person is, even though they look like someone that you're supposed to trust. And I think because we don't see a lot of monsters that look other than human, we get kind of this interesting psychology in Supernatural around, well, what does it mean to fear your neighbor or the person you live with or the person that you've known your whole life? And that's a different kind of fear than what we see in, say, first thing that comes to mind is something like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, where a lot of the monsters look like monsters. They wouldn't blend it.
Okay. Mandy?
It just made me think of two, but both Susan and Kaela were talking about this confrontation with yourself and this understanding of, okay, so with Dean confronting himself, and he does that more than once in this series, just understanding, okay, so what makes real Dean Dean that can't be fully mimicked or kind of played off by the shifter, because the shifter has his body, but it's when the possession that they also have your memory, kind of thing. So when you're possessed or a vessel, depending on the way you are possessed, I guess, then that becomes even scarier, I think, and harder to confront, because now this thing that is imitating is mostly you, or enough of you to fool those around you. And so then, and you're tucked away realizing that's not me, but everybody thinks it's me. So what do I do now? And back to the shifter, I think you can tell them by the eyes, by the reflection, is that the right monster? And so then the people that can recognize that, like, through that, they're considered crazy. Like, that's, demonize, like, or I don't remember what Robbie called him. Susan, can
Or
you help me?
Ronald.
Ronald, thank you.
Ronald. Yeah.
Yes.
Laser eyes.
Yeah, laser eyes. Thank you. He could recognize, he knew that it was not something that should be there, but everybody thought he was crazy until the Winchesters are like, oh, that really is something, but who would believe the Winchesters? So, like, a little bit of, like, we know that you're not crazy, but nobody else will believe us. So what are we going to do? So there's that confrontation then with the whole life of hunters, and kind of this thing of recognizing what's real but what others consider not. So kind of shifting, the metaphorical shift of regular citizens to hunters, and kind of when do you have that talk with people? And once you have that talk with people, it changes their entire lives and the ramifications of that as well. So something else to consider.
I think one of the things that really strikes me, especially on rewatches, is with the when the shifter took on Dean's attributes, was when Dean looks at himself, and I think it's the first time Dean saw himself as a killer. The shifter was a killer. Dean has always been a hunter. It's been justified. It's been, it's been righteous. There were reasons. He was a soldier. And this is just a stone cold killer in his body. And I think there is this start of something that carries on all the way through the Mark of Cain and the rest of the series, where Dean starts to realize that he's maybe a little too good at the job. That what has it cost him? What has it made him to be a killer? And how does he know it was always justified? There's some things that happen later on, like with Amy Pond, where he realizes he screwed up. And so but I think this is the beginning of that loss of innocence, when he sees that aspect in himself. And he jokes about it later in Lebanon when we see the wanted poster. Sam is the Kaela-loving lawyer, and Dean's on the FBI most wanted list, and he's like, hey, it's not a bad picture. But, that's kind of running it to the ultimate conclusion. What would he have become without John, and later without Sam keeping him human? So that was kind of one of the takeaways from that, as well as Sam, like you said, thinking this is Dean, knowing it should be Dean, but then in that basement, not acting like Dean. And now all of a sudden, Dean's not the protector, he's the antagonist. And I think that really messes with Sam's head. As it should.
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, that whole idea of, like Kaela was saying about the ability to trust is kind of gone there. I know that when we see down the road, we see the Leviathans and we see their doppelgangers, and Dean, it doesn't take Dean very long to recognize that that's not Sam. That's not his Sam, when he's coming toward him. And so, which is where the borax, was handy. But I think that, that inability to trust your own eyes, your own senses, to buy into who that person is supposed to be, and they're not. And then you start to wonder about yourself. You can't really trust yourself. And so that kind of comes back on the person dealing with the doppelganger, or the other, for lack of another term.
Kaela?
Yeah, I'm thinking of the siren episode kind of building off of other creatures besides shapeshifters, because the sirens shapeshift in a very different way, where rather than mimicking people, it's this idea of being what somebody truly desires. And that we think we know what sirens are throughout that whole episode because of how they've been set up for us as being the various women in the strip club. And then to find out that no, actually, that is not who our siren is posing as with Dean. And I think there's lots of different ways that that's been read into in terms of what that means for Dean and what he's seeing. But the way that that then plays the brothers off of one another in the conflict. And I think that that's another piece that we see with shape-shifting, body swapping, things like that, is that it, in sort of unseating some of that distrust, starts to then lead to character development for the boys.
Mm-hmm. Mandy?
I was thinking of more possession than shapeshifting, but when John is possessed by Azazel and Dean recognizes the difference because John was nice and complimentary, it's like, you did great, son. It's like, he would be furious. It's like, and twofold here, like how sad that Dean would recognize kindness and praise as not John, kind of thing. But also this idea of a second side of that is, as difficult and as painful and horrible as it is to lose the parent, maybe that's one of the ways Dean begins to be able to let go a little bit of John, to understand that, um, you know, um, that wasn't my father, and trying to protect my father by not killing him. Like, I'm not going to kill my dad to kill the demon. That's not what we do. We self-sacrifice instead, kind of thing. So setting up John's ultimate sacrifice later. But this idea too that Dean is able to see through that deception. So, and finding the way kind of around killing John, and setting up this idea of this possibility of, and the probability of John finishing the job later, in protection of Sam, because ultimately Dean, I think, in some ways would sacrifice John for Sam, and the trade would make sense to him. For that would make sense to John too, because like that's what a father does. But Dean, being the parentified child, would also kind of sacrifice himself, or allow the parent to be sacrificed, and kind of shifting into that metaphorical role, which wasn't always metaphorical for Dean, is another thing to consider as well. And to truly jump off, and we can come back later, I also thought of French Mistake, when the boys play themselves playing themselves. It's like, it's so very meta there, and we can come back to that if we want to. But just this idea of trying to understanding who you're supposed to be, and then acting like yourself. And how do you act like yourself? That must be fake mine. And confronting all of these things in reality, that it's sorry, it's way too many layers, but just something to consider as well. Susan, I see you kind of laughing at that.
Well, and one thing that we only get in fan fiction, we didn't get actually in the show, is Sam and Dean swapping bodies with each other. And anybody who watched the first live action Scooby-Doo movie saw what happened to the Scooby Gang when their souls all got shifted around, and that was, amusing. But we get a little bit of that, I think, with Swap Meet and About a Boy, when Sam ends up being, the gangly kid who wins the lottery and ends up inside Sam's body. And Sam gets adolescence all over again, which pretty much also happens to Dean, being 14 again. And, suddenly Sam has to be the older brother. And your son is so polite. Just the look on Sam's face when the lady says that. But you've got so many different dynamics there. Sam trying to be himself in a body that doesn't match what he's used to. So he's uncoordinated. This is a guy who's a terrific shot. This is a guy who's good at close combat, and he falls down a lot. Dean being only 14, so there's things he can't do. And I think that's an interesting thing for them, is we're used to thinking of people losing physical ability because of age or illness or some kind of chronic condition. But to wake up one morning in a different body that doesn't work the way yours did, for better or worse, is a whole new kettle of fish. And we definitely see it play with their heads as they try to figure out how to get back to where they belong. Thoughts, Susan? Any other, what comes to your mind?
Yeah, well, I think, you touching on a couple of those, like you did with Swap Meet, and, Sam's frustration at the fact that, again, well, and when we watch that episode, and we know as the audience, we know Sam is not Sam. We know he's this goofy kid that's all excited to go have the sex. And he's, and enjoying the hamburger because of the bun, he can eat the, gluten and all that. But so we see it, but we see all these things that we know are not Sam-like, and yet they go right past Dean. in this case where, he's, oh, sweet, they're going to do this and that. And that's so not Sam, tossing back a drink, and the way, just the mannerisms are so not Sam. And Dean doesn't recognize that. And I always found that kind of interesting. And then, of course, the kid throws away all the cell phones. So, what is it finally that pushes Dean? Is it, oh, he checks his messages that, Sam's left a million messages saying that guy you're with, that's not me. And so I think that's an interesting thing too, that Dean didn't recognize, why. And, when, we don't drink often together, or we don't do this together. And Dean and the kid says, yeah, well, we should. So, in some ways he was giving Dean maybe what Dean had always wanted. And maybe Dean didn't want to question that, but there's so many obvious, clues, I think, of this is not Sam. This is not the Sam we know. How come Dean doesn't recognize it? But again, it's sort of like what Kaela was talking about, and the idea of, do we trust what our eyes are showing us? And so if I don't trust what my eyes are showing me, then that's a whole other internal conversation that maybe Dean wasn't wanting to have in that moment, because the kid was all stoked about going on this ghost hunt, and it's normal. That's normal 9 to 5. And for him to be all excited about it should have clued Dean in, I would think.
Mhm.
Those are my thoughts on
Kaela?
something.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there about Dean being selective and how he attends to people in front of him not being the actual people in front of him. Because there's moments like the Leviathan approaching him where he's immediately not Sammy. Immediately, you are not my brother. And then we have that example from Swamp Meat. We also have when Cass is being possessed by Lucifer, and he notices, similar to Sam in the other episode, he notices things are off. Like, one of the most interesting ones is Cass touches his shoulder, or I guess Lucifer touches his shoulder, and it's the wrong shoulder. And he looks at the hand and is like, why are you touching me on that shoulder? And he has this look of confusion. Things are off, but they're not off enough for him to want to question it, I think is a really good observation there, because they're off enough that he should be questioning it, and he's just not. And that seems to be something pretty consistent for him. I think the other thing that was coming up for me as you were talking was the way that Sam looks at Dean when he's now having to be kind of in this like almost parent role. When Dean has de-aged, there's this wonderful moment between the two of them where he's kind of staring, and Dean calls him out on it. And he's like, I don't ever remember you looking this small, basically. I don't ever remember you looking like a kid. You were never a kid to me. And so again, we kind of see this way that the shape-shifting and possession moves those things forward. It's not just the monster of the week. It's very much baked into the show to say, like, this tells us something about who these people are.
Mm-hmm. Mandy?
I wanted to raise another question related to that, and maybe Soulless Sam, and kind of the ways of recognizing the differences in Soulless Sam. Like, what, like, we knew like there was something different with Sam, we as the viewers, but how long it took to kind of like, wait, that's not quite Sam. So what are some of the markers? I'm going to open that up, of Soulless Sam that shifted. What were the differences that you noticed?
Well, he stopped to have a roll in the hay with Patchouli Girl when Dean was missing. And, my brother went missing. Oh, I'm so sorry. Well, it's been a while. I've gotten over it. When you were kids, not half an hour ago. I mean, he was not the urgent Sam, move heaven and hell that we're used to. He took time for diversions.
And Dean knew at that point that Sam was soulless. So that, he knew Sam was soulless at that point. But and that's why he tries to get him to, rein it in because he's like, I'll be your conscience. I'll be the one, just, but there were lots of little things that should have, I mean, right in the very first moment when Dean awakens and Sam's sitting there, when we see the embrace, there's nothing in Sam's eyes when he's embracing Dean. There's nothing there. And so, that set off alarm bells in me the first time I saw that. And I went, that doesn't look right. And so after that, then so many of these little moments when Sam's empathy is not there, and Dean expects there to be empathy there because there always had been. And so, What he was what?
And he waited a year to come get Dean, which is not Sam.
Right. Sam, like he said, put him out of his misery anyway, at least let him know that he was back, and Bobby didn't let him know either. And so I think, that's another thing that poor Dean feels betrayed because nobody let him know that Sam was alive, that whole year. So that was an interesting progression through that first half of that season when we finally find out what's wrong with Sam. But yeah, there were a lot of little things, and then of course we see him let Dean get bit by the vampire. And that was very out of character for Sam.
Well, one of the things that's really interesting about characters when they're soulless is that there are still things about them that are very core to who they are. So Sam is still a health nut. Jack is still obsessed with the approval of the Winchesters. Donatello still really likes his fried chicken and still does professorship things. It's Cass, I think, explains it as it's not necessarily the presence of evil, it's the absence of good. And so we still see things that are them, but it's just not quite right. It's off.
Yeah, well, when Dean is a demon, same sort of thing. He still enjoys going to the bars. He still enjoys, drinking with Crowley, but he's not fully him. Now, throughout the show, the boys also take on different personas. They don't exactly swap bodies, but they certainly swap clothes, whether they are posing as being priests or fish and wildlife inspectors or the FBI or one of a million things that they've had the fake badges for. In fact, I don't know if you saw the recent news article where somebody actually got arrested and what the police found on him was a fake FBI badge, and it was the Sam Winchester badge you can buy at conventions. And it was like, oh my gosh. Somebody actually tried to use one of those badges. It was police found these in the suspect's car. It's like, I know that badge. I've seen that badge before. Dude, that was a wrong move. But what does it do to live that lie? Now, granted, we only see them live it for a little bit in each episode, but they theoretically, there were 15 years, we got 327 episodes. That's not even 365 days in 1 year. So what about all those other days we didn't see where they're being someone else? What does that do to you to pretend like that? Susan?
I think what's really interesting is, yes, we have all the rock star aliases and we have all these different names. And I think in one of the recaps, I think season 3, The Usual Suspects, or season 2, I guess, The Usual Suspects, with Linda Blair. The recap of that one is such a great one to look at because it goes through all their FBI, Dr. Jerry Kaplan, that, it goes through all of these different personas in this one little piece. And so you want to show someone this is how all these different people that they become, and whether they're reporters or they're as priests, they're dressed as priests a couple different times. And how they, what's interesting with the rock star aliases is they have their favorites. You know, I think it was when Dean and when they were talking about getting to be, was it the Zeppelin, the guitarist Jimmy Page and Robert Plant. And I think it was Dean that always likes to be Jimmy Page. And you know, he was usually you like to be Jimmy Page. How, you know, so it's kind of an interesting, I can't remember what episode that one was, but it's like he was trying to be nice to him, so he was letting him be Jimmy Page. I think in their when they had their Fed suits on and they were who they were. But I think it's really interesting how much of what is Dean says, it's kind of scary how much of a Fed you are to Sam when he you know, confiscates poor Ronald's videos. Sam recognizes just how much of a Fed Sam has become. And I think they do sort of play that good cop, bad cop thing when, you know, when they're after Rowena and they catch the witch that's there and make her scry to find Rowena. But yeah, they take on those personas quite a bit. I think they become very authoritarian.
There's an old Bugs Bunny Elmer Fudd cartoon where a bunch of magical hats go missing and they get caught on the wind, and Bugs and Elmer are constantly switching hats, and every time they switch the hat they become whatever that hat is, whether that's you know, a cop or a hunter or a bride or whatever. And it's kind of like that. We, you know, we put the clothing on to reinforce the role, but then do we forget we're just playing a role? Back to you, Kaela.
Well, and I think they do sometimes forget that they're just playing a role, because it does fuse a little bit with their personalities. Like, I was watching an episode the other day, I forget exactly which episode it was, but during the piece where they were playing feds, there was the more like caricature-y version of Dean that by that point in the series, I think it was in season 14, we're not really getting that as much behind the scenes when they're in the bunker anymore. We're getting a much more like home life Dean that's a little bit more vulnerable than he's been in previous seasons. And I remember thinking, that's really strange. When he's showing up as this FBI agent, he's like bashing people for being nerdy again, which is not really a thing he's done in a while. And so I think there is a way that it fuses with their personalities, but with this sort of outward machismo version of their personalities that they've been showing to everyone else. And as the show sort of deconstructs and they get deeper and deeper as they're in the bunker and they have more family around them and we get to see more of who they are deep down, when they're playing those roles, I think much the way we all have roles that we play and ways that we act different when we're, you know, in our professional role or our out in public role. There's a difference there, but it's also still a piece of who they are.
Yeah, where Sam's natural empathy, for example, works very well in his priest guise. You know, he does that anyhow. But that makes him a little more believable as a priest than Dean. Mandy?
I was also thinking of just my imagination when they pull up to the house with the little girl and realize, okay, the Fed's not gonna. This is not the best of times for this particular persona. So who are we going to be? What clothes do we need to put on? So they're in cardigans, and they go up kind of soft, and Dean's like, "You're making me do this," and he's not really feeling it. And then just and that works with Sam's empathy too, and then with Dean kind of just reacting to all the stuff that they're able to see because of Sully, and it's like, great, we're child psychologists and teddy bear doctors and these different things that they inhabit maybe once or twice, but just having to inhabit that and remembering who they're talking to and what names they need to respond to, and how to speak to someone. Like, when are you authoritative and when are you this empathetic, gentle, or gentle but firm kind of thing, or firm but gentle? When do you inhabit that language? And who do you send to do what kind of job? You send Sam to the academics, send Dean to the bars, so to speak. And if they have to flip that, oh my goodness, good luck, kind of thing. So finding the strengths in the characters that they inhabit, as well, and understanding who can do what and who needs to answer to what also matters. And when they're caught, at least when Jody catches them with Bobby as the FBI, and it's like, wait. And so when the disguise is broken, or when the cover is blown, it's also interesting to see how they react to that. It's like, oh, so now how much do we tell? How much of ourselves do we actually reveal, and how much do we tell people? And again, the fallout of those conversations, like what lives change. And because unlike Harry Potter, where you can obliviate people, you can't just change people's memories without a spell, kind of thing. And then you have the ethics of doing so, which we see with Dean and Lisa and Ben. And so, like, how far do you go to protect these identities? And then with Frank, and all of those, you're not Alias Smith all the time. That's all who you are. Don't say any other names. And when you have to go incognito, how do you do that? So all sorts of thoughts, none of them complete. Sorry.
All that, but that sheepishness they get when Jody calls, when they Bobby Singer. That they get so sheepish about that. But yeah, you can see that the disguise kind of got ripped away in that moment. So then they have to.
Well, and even when they're in Lebanon, settled down in the bunker for how many years, we realize in the episode Lebanon, the town knows them as the Campbell brothers. That they still can't be the Winchesters officially, because the Winchesters are either wanted or dead. And so they're still putting on that false persona, even in the town that has started to become the closest thing they've had to home. I want to quickly come back to the French mistake, because Mandy brought it up, and I thought it definitely yields some interesting fodder. So thoughts on that episode, Susan?
Oh, yeah, that particular episode is just golden. And when I first saw the synopsis, I thought, oh, this is going to be stupid, but it's amazing. And they knocked it out of the park, and they just did such a wonderful job with it. But yeah, this idea of these Jared and Jensen people are really different from the real Jared and Jensen people. And it's kind of funny because they tend to really make the Jensen and Jared, they're not talking to each other. They're that obvious and ego thing going on. And then the big pictures behind, the big picture of Jared on the horse behind him. And, so this actor ego stuff that's going on is so far apart from what Sam and Dean are that, and then they have to put on a Jared and Jensen. So yeah, that is probably the most convoluted episode, but it does make you wonder. So I'm playing myself, playing a character, playing myself, and I'm playing myself in a way that is not really who I am. So that had to be, I would really love to sit down and talk with them about, their strategies of, and their process of taking on those particular roles. So yeah, it's layer, talk about layer upon layer.
Okay, Kaela?
Well, and I love the little bit that they have talked about with the scene where they have to be acting. And they have talked a little bit at panels about like how to embody bad acting, like the fact that Sam can't figure out what to do with his hands. And really just like the layers for everybody involved, because like, Jen was back in that episode, and Misha playing a version of himself. There's all sorts of interesting ways that they wove that together with their actual lives, while very much not being their lives.
Mm-hmm. Mandy?
Sorry. I think one thing that stood out to me was in that particular episode was their relief to get back to the life that they knew and that they had. And to go through all of that and see kind of this perception of supernatural, like who would want to watch our lives according to this? Nobody. Kind of thing. You know, the reviews of season 5, it's like, oh, season 6, what's going to happen in season 6? And then understanding that, well, we're in a world with no magic. We're in this regular place that, yes, our relationship is weird here, but it's a place where we're safe, where it's normal, where it's like it's not our normal, but it's a place we could be. And then once they're back to the life that they understand, it's like, oh, okay, this is the life we know. Now we're back what we're doing, what we know we should be doing, and this relationship that at times strained um, is where it should be. Like we're brothers again. Whereas in the French mistake world, we're not. We're this, we don't talk, at least we're talking at the end, kind of thing. They didn't have this closeness. They didn't always have that closeness before they got launched into that world, but they've grown together to this point, and kind of figuring their way through all of these different things and coming to terms with this idea of, this post-apocalypse and this, like, how do we proceed now that we're past this? What happens now? So the relief to be back to who they were, who they understood themselves to be, matters here as well. And I think sometimes to extend it to us, or me as a viewer at least, when I'm in situations where I have to be who I feel is somebody else sometimes, or like take on this persona that isn't me, the relief that I have to then be able to take that off when I'm in a place where I can be more comfortable. And that's something I think Supernatural helps a little bit with, this idea of confronting these things that we don't often want to. But through this fiction and through these stories, we can say, oh, okay, we can fight that battle, we can fight that demon, literal or figurative. We can take these steps to confront those things, and we have the safety of turning it off if we need to. So we don't always have that safety in real life, and so I think that's something that it offers as well. We can recognize those things that aren't quite right, somehow, like things that have shifted, or how we have maybe have shifted as well, and to come back to what and who we need.
I had to laugh just this week. Talk about putting on other skins. Jared, of course, is doing Walker now. And he posted a photo of himself sitting in the passenger seat of the Impala little bro that he owns. And the actor who plays his son on Walker, who's a teenager, is sitting in the driver's seat. Sam and Jared is clearly instructing this young man who's driving it, who is wearing a supernatural shirt. And in the background out the window is the picture from the French Mistake of Jared on the horse that was hanging over his desk, which he always said he kept in his garage. Well, this was his garage. You can see it out the window. And it's like, okay, mind twist here. Here's Jared being Walker, being Sam, instructing. Is that Augie or is that Dean Jr.? And there's the painting. So, they really love their little games like that. So, well, folks, we've gone through our time as usual, and I'm sure we could come up with even more examples, but this has been a lot of fun. Before we wrap up, please let everybody know where we can find you online. And if you have a new, recent, or upcoming book, tell us about it. Susan?
Well, I'm Susan Nylander. I'm happy to have you email me at womenandSupernatural@gmail.com. That is going to be our next book, Women in Supernatural, and you can get us our email through that. Also, Death and Supernatural, still available at Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com and all your favorite booksellers. And McFarland is our publisher. So buy Death and Supernatural.
Very good. Kaela.
Again, Kaela Joseph. You can find me at AK Nerd Fighting on Twitter. Always Keep Nerd Fighting on Facebook. And books that I'm in are in all major retailers. Again, Fandom Acts of Kindness and Soups Ain't Always Heroes, and There'll Be Peace When You Are Done.
Very good. Mandy?
You can find me where Susan is, womensupernatural@gmail.com. Also, Death and Supernatural, I think, is still, deathandsupernatural@gmail.com is also still live, so you're welcome to email us there. I am Elaisona, Elaisona, on X, or formerly Twitter. I am still there. I don't do a lot, but you can find me there. Like Susan said, we have a book coming out hopefully next year. We'll keep you posted, and we look forward to more conversations.
And I'm pretty easy to find at gailzmartin.com, morganbryce.com. All my socials, and I'm on most of them, are under one or both of those names. So if you spell them right, you'll find me. I also run the Supernatural TFWNC group on Facebook. I'm a columnist for the Winchester Family Business. I have a chapter in There'll Be Peace When You Are Done, but most of the time I'm here on Continual. So thank you so much for being fantastic panelists. And thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There will be more Supernatural coming up soon, so we'll see you online.